In the winter of 1591, a physician in Brussels named Walther Hermann Ryff documented a patient who awoke in the dead of night, completely unable to move. The patient reported a crushing weight on his chest and the distinct, terrifying presence of a malevolent entity hovering in the room. Across the Atlantic, centuries earlier, the indigenous Hong people of the mountainous regions of Laos described the exact same phenomenon, calling it Tsog Tsuam, a nocturnal spirit that pinned its victims to their beds. In 17th century Newfoundland, it was the Old Hag. In medieval Scandinavia, the Mara. In ancient Assyria, the Incubus. Separated by vast oceans, centuries of time, and entirely distinct religious and cultural frameworks, these civilizations documented the same visitor. The most resistant problem in this case is not that people wake up paralyzed. Modern medicine can explain that. The profound anomaly is that people who have no possible way of sharing information are hallucinating the exact same entity, performing the exact same action, in the exact same location. Every culture on Earth has a name for the demon that sits on the chest. To understand why this happens, we have to look at the actors involved: the sleeping human body, the conscious mind, and the evolutionary architecture of the brain. For millennia, the stakes of this phenomenon were existential. To wake up paralyzed was to be attacked by the supernatural, a demonic assault that could steal your breath, your sanity, or your life. Only in the last half-century has the medical community systematically studied this, reframing a demonic assault as a neurological misfire. But replacing the supernatural framework with a physiological one does not erase the core mystery, it merely sharpens it. Why does a neurological misfire produce a demon? Before constructing any narrative, we must establish the types of evidence available and their weight, because the listener must have the tools to judge every claim that follows, including the official medical account. Tier 1 evidence in this case consists of physical and physiological data, polysomnography, or sleep study recordings, which capture brain waves, eye movements, and muscle activity during these episodes, and neurochemical studies mapping the specific neurotransmitters involved in sleep paralysis. Tier 2 evidence is corroborated anthropological and epidemiological data. Multiple independent studies across different continents confirm the prevalence of the phenomenon and the cross-cultural consistency of the hallucinated entity. Testimony is evidence, and when it converges independently from hundreds of isolated cultures, its weight increases. Tier 3 evidence consists of single-source claims, such as individual accounts of paranormal assault, which must be used with extreme caution. Finally, we must discard what is not evidence: claims of actual demonic or alien presence, and internet folklore that reverse engineers the experience to fit modern supernatural or extraterrestrial narratives. Two logical rules apply throughout this analysis. First, correlation does not equal causation. Just because an individual sleeps on their back and experiences paralysis does not mean the sleep position causes the specific hallucination, unless a mechanism is named. Second, absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. Just because we cannot currently explain the exact archetypal uniformity of the demon does not prove it is a supernatural entity. With these tiers defined, we can isolate the two specific anomalies that the official record struggles to account for. Anomaly 1. The official physiological model explains hallucinations as random neural noise, but random noise should produce a wide, chaotic variance in hallucination types. The official record cannot account for the uniform, cross-cultural specificity of the intruder hallucination, a malevolent, sentient entity, because random neural firing across isolated populations should not independently generate the exact same archetype. Anomaly 2. The physical constraint of shallow breathing during sleep paralysis is well documented, but the official record cannot account for why this internal physiological deficit is universally externalized and personified as a deliberate, malicious agent sitting on the chest, rather than simply experienced as a bodily dysfunction, like shortness of breath from asthma. From Tier 1 and corroborated Tier 2 evidence only, we can establish a clear baseline. The evidence establishes that sleep paralysis occurs during the transitional state between rapid eye movement sleep and wakefulness. It establishes that during REM sleep, the brain paralyzes the body via glycine and GABA neurotransmitters to prevent acting out dreams. It establishes that when a person wakes prematurely while this paralysis is still active, they experience conscious immobility and panic. The evidence establishes that breathing during REM is shallow and automatic, meaning a paralyzed person cannot take a voluntary deep breath, creating a sensation of chest pressure. It does not establish that any external entity exists, nor does it establish precisely why the brain universally generates the specific hallucination of that entity. Using this established baseline, we can reconstruct the chronological narrative of a sleep paralysis episode. The record establishes the onset of REM sleep. What follows is reconstructed from polysomnographic data. The brain descends into deep sleep, paralyzing the skeletal muscles to keep the body still. For reasons not entirely understood, often correlated with disrupted sleep patterns, stress, or sleeping in a supine position, the cerebral cortex wakes up. The record establishes the conscious awakening. What follows is reconstructed from the mechanics of the nervous system. The mind becomes alert, but the brainstem has not received the signal to lift the muscle atonia. The person is awake, but cannot move. The record establishes the subsequent panic. The subjective experience of the hallucination is reconstructed from millions of corroborated Tier 2 testimonies. The individual realizes they cannot move. They try to breathe deeply and find they cannot, as the diaphragm remains locked in automatic REM mode. The chest feels crushed. Then, the dream state circuitry, still active, bleeds into waking consciousness. The brain, detecting extreme danger and physiological distress, projects an image into the room. An entity. A demon. The episode ends when the paralysis lifts, either gradually or with a sudden jerk, leaving the individual in a state of profound terror. The official record, as maintained by sleep medicine, concludes that sleep paralysis is a harmless, if terrifying, dissociated REM state. The strongest evidence for this is the Tier 1 physiological data. Brain waves during sleep paralysis mirror REM sleep, while the individual reports conscious awareness. The muscle atonia is chemically identical to REM atonia. The official explanation holds perfectly for the mechanics of the paralysis and the presence of hallucinations. It accounts for the baseline. However, it leaves the two documented anomalies largely unaddressed. Sleep medicine explains that hallucinations occur because dream imagery is projected onto the waking world, but it treats the specific content of that imagery, the universal intruder, as an epiphenomenon, a random byproduct with no deeper mechanical explanation. It effectively shrugs at why the demon is always the same. At this point, you must weigh the evidence for yourself, evaluating the weight of the official account against alternatives that attempt to address the anomalies left unresolved. The simplest explanation that accounts for the baseline and the anomalies does not require the supernatural, but it does require looking beyond basic sleep mechanics and into evolutionary psychology. This is the hypervigilance and threat detection model. When a person wakes paralyzed, the brain recognizes a catastrophic error, the body cannot move, and breathing is failing. The amygdala, the brain's threat detection center, goes into overdrive. The brain searches the environment for the cause of this extreme physiological distress. Finding no external trigger, it does what the human brain evolved to do when faced with inexplicable danger in the dark: it assumes an agent. In evolutionary terms, a false positive, assuming a predator is in the room when there is only wind, costs far less than a false negative, assuming it is just wind when a leopard is stalking you. Therefore, the brain generates an agent to justify the fear. The evidence supporting this is the Tier 1 neurological understanding of the amygdala's function and the Tier 2 anthropological data showing that the intruder is universally perceived as a threat. This model accounts for anomaly 1. The intruder is not random noise, but a hardwired evolutionary template. However, it struggles with anomaly 2. It does not fully explain why the agent is specifically suffocating the victim, rather than simply stalking them, nor why the entity is so often perceived as sitting on the chest. A second, more refined explanation merges the hypervigilance model with proprioceptive mapping. When the brain wakes paralyzed, it sends signals to the body to move, but the signals are blocked at the brainstem. The motor cortex expects feedback from the muscles, but receives silence. Simultaneously, the individual struggles to breathe, feeling a heavy weight on their chest. The brain, attempting to resolve the conflicting data between intense motor intention, physical restraint, and suffocation, creates a causal narrative. It externalizes the internal resistance. The feeling of weight on the chest is projected outward as an external entity applying that weight. The demon sitting on the chest is the brain's spatial mapping of its own paralyzed, suffocating body drawn into the external world. This accounts for the baseline of the paralysis and both anomalies. It explains the malevolent agent as an evolutionary template of an intruder, and it explains the specific chest-sitting action as the externalization of the physiological sensation of REM breathing restriction. The evidence for this is found in Tier 1 studies of phantom limb pain and body mapping, where the brain similarly misattributes internal signals to external or absent realities. What would falsify this model would be the discovery of a culture where sleep paralysis involves no hallucination of an intruder, or an intruder that does not interact with the chest or breathing, a finding that decades of anthropology have not produced. There remain open questions. If the neurological and evolutionary models are correct, is the specific visual form of the demon, the hag, the shadow man, the alien, filled in by cultural conditioning, or is there a deeper, innate neuroanatomical template? The type of evidence that would resolve this would be fMRI scans capturing the visual cortex during a spontaneous sleep paralysis episode, allowing researchers to see if the hallucination originates from the same structures in every human regardless of culture. This evidence does not currently exist because sleep paralysis is unpredictable. You cannot ethically or reliably trigger it inside a